Hi, everybody. Am I on, guys?
You're on.
Folks, you have no idea how big a crew I have here. This is my house. I'm Dennis Prager. Welcome to my house. I feel free to smoke my cigars. Very anti-cigarettes, just want to make that clear. But this is a joy. My dad, may he rest in peace, smoked a few a day till he was 96. Anyway, welcome. I have a very, very serious subject I want to raise with you. And I'd love to know if this has hit you or your family. And that is people defriending, both figuratively on Facebook and literally in life, defriending relatives or friends who voted for Donald Trump. This is a very serious subject, and one that has been covered in the Wall Street Journal, and which I covered on my national radio show, which if you have never heard, I'm sure I'm on in your city, or the odds are I am on in your city. People have called in, and people have written, and people have been described in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. I'll give you an example. A guy called my show, said his daughter said that he can no longer be in touch with his grandchildren, her children, because he voted for Donald Trump. And then the lines were flooded for an hour with people who have lost friends, children, other relatives, because those relatives are so angry that this person voted for Trump. You have to think about this for a moment. How come it only works in one direction? Can you imagine? I can't, all right? Let me be very clear. I cannot imagine that it would happen that if somebody's dad, some Trump's voting woman, finds out her dad voted for Hillary Clinton, and she decides, you can never see my children again, your grandchildren, because you voted for Hillary Clinton. It's inconceivable. I can't imagine. I mean, there were certain things that there are always exceptions. And I assume that just on the basis of mathematics, there's an exception to this. But I can't even imagine one exception where a conservative would say, my parent cannot see my children because my parent is on the left. It just is inconceivable to me. Why does it work in only one direction? This is the phenomenon of the argument that the hate comes from the right. The hate doesn't come from the right. The hate comes from the left. And this is a living proof. There were no articles in national newspapers about conservatives defriending liberal friends. If you have a friend from high school and the person sends out puts out on Facebook some article or video that comes from the liberal side of the spectrum, I can't imagine, I'm not going to allow this person to be a friend of mine anymore. On the contrary, I spend at least half my time reading what the people I don't agree with say. At least half the time. I read every New York Times columnist. I read the Washington Post. I read the LA Times. I go to the CNN website. I am very curious to know what do the people I don't agree with think. But they're not. Because we think they're wrong and they think we're evil. That's one of the big differences between left and right. So I guess is it time of you folks going to call in? I wanted to open up with that. It's an incredibly important thing. And I can't tell you how bad I feel. I'm a granddad. And if my child said to me, you voted for Trump, I am not going to let you see your grandchildren, I would think that I had raised a bad human being, because you have to be a bad human being. I'm sorry, I want to make this clear as possible. If you deprive your parents of the chance to see their grandchildren because of politics, you are a bad human being. And it takes a lot to be a bad human being. It's not just an error. That's an act of evil. Because there's nothing more painful. And what are you going to say to your children? Well, what if your children eventually differ with you politically? Are they going to do the same thing and tell their children, you can't speak to grandma because she's on the left? I mean, it's so mind-boggling. The immorality of it, the meanness, the sheer meanness, it really does bother me, in case you couldn't tell. That's why I relax with this. So, I'm happy to take calls. If this has been a factor in your life, I would be very interested in knowing about it. You have some there, Jared?
A lot of questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Josh F. asks, Dennis, what can we do to reduce the influence of the biased news media or to make it less biased?
What can we do to reduce the influence of the biased media? Nothing except be aware of it and tell everybody. I don't have a problem that the New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Miami Herald, etc., that they are all on the left. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with the fact that they don't often admit it. By the way, the ombudsman, the public editor of the New York Times, did acknowledge it. This is a liberal newspaper. Okay, that's fine. But people should understand that it colors the way it reports things. I'll give you one little thing. Whenever they cite a conservative writer, thinker, talk show host, or institution, the New York Times will say, well, as the Conservative Heritage Foundation, the conservative radio talk show host Dennis Prager, which is fine, but they never do it with the left. They quote a radical left group called the Southern Poverty Law Center. You can't get farther left unless you become Leninist. It is a radical left, and I think it's a hate group, the Southern Poverty Law Center. They're quoted in the New York Times, but they never say, according to the left wing or liberal Southern Poverty Law Center. These things saturate the media. So there's nothing you can do except go to journalism school, keep your values, and then try to enter mainstream media. It'll be very hard, but I can't think of another way. We have to be stronger and produce better media. That's the best answer. It's why we produce PragerU with 250 million views this year.
Oscar D., a student in Prager Force, asks, Dennis, when progressives and conservatives get into a debate or an argument, and the conservative clearly out-debates the progressive, why doesn't that change the progressive person's position?
Okay, I wish everybody could have heard you ask it. We should probably get you a mic for the next time. But I'll repeat it, I understand, but it's better if I have the words. When a progressive and a conservative get into a debate and the conservative gives solid arguments, why doesn't it change the progressive's mind? Okay, the most honest answer after a lifetime of dealing with this that I can give is, leftism is not thought through. It is felt. This has taken me a good chunk of my life to figure out, because my conservatism is thought through. I grew up a liberal, I grew up a Democrat, and I had to think everything through. But for leftism, since Karl Marx, it's all based on passion. We love the underdog, we love the marginalized. That's why their language is such. That's why they have all these terms for us. We don't have terms for them. Herb, sexist, intolerant, xenophobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, racist, bigoted. That's all they need to know. You don't need to know anything in doing that. All you need to know is what label do I pin on the conservative, and then I move on. That's why I began by talking about defriending even parents, because it's all passion, not reason.
Aaron F. asks, how do you recommend I debate my liberal friends who believe in things like white privilege and the gender wage gap?
How do you debate your friends who believe in things like the gender wage gap, which has been disproven so often? Just see our video by Christina Huff Summers on the, I believe she's the one who gave it on the wage gap, the so-called wage gap. And what was the other one?
And white privilege.
Oh, white privilege. Okay. Well, first of all, here's a general rule. Never yell. Okay? That is a critical rule. Be calm, be brief, be concise. They don't have a very large attention span because it's all passion. So be very brief. Ask them, for example, what were the two again? There was the wage gap and white privilege. Okay. My answer to white privilege is very simple. Here, you want to know the ultimate privilege? Here. The ultimate privilege is two-parent privilege. If you grow up with two parents and you have a father and a mother in your life, and you have a stable home environment, you will succeed in America. That's the ultimate privilege. A black with two parents does better than a white kid who never had a dad, unless, of course, there are some terrific single women. I want to make that clear. But even they would admit it would be ideal to have a dad. But where the dad, in other words, where the dad has just abandoned the kids or has been thrown out by the mom or whatever, there are advantages in America. The ultimate advantage is American advantage. It's a big advantage to be American. Number two, a two-parent advantage. Number three, there's a tremendous advantage in being raised in a religious home. Huge advantage. The number of violent criminals in prison who are regular church or synagogue goers is close to zero. So there are many advantages. White happens not to be one of them. White is not built-in advantage nearly as much as those other things that I just mentioned.
Matt K. asks, Dennis, what's the best way for a conservative college student to meet other conservative college students?
The best way for a conservative college student to meet other conservative college students. That's a tough question. I'm not on the college campus enough to answer. I would assume by joining an organization or joining Prager Force, for example, that would enable you to do so because you would draw such people into your life. So existing organizations, become a Prager Force representative on your campus, or just go on Tinder and say, "Hi, I'm a conservative." That would be fun. See what happens. You'll get a lot of hate. You'll certainly exclude a lot of people immediately. I actually think it's worth doing.
Khalidor F. asks, what type of cigar are you smoking right now?
Right now, let me see, that's a very good question. It was given as a gift, so I know the ones that I buy, the ones that I'm given as a gift, if they look strong, I only care, I could go on for an hour on this, but I won't. I only care that it's a strong cigar. Here's the irony. This much wine or whiskey, and I get a terrible headache. I just can't drink alcohol. I'm not against it, I just can't do it. But there is no cigar that's too strong for me. So that's I particularly like Nicaraguan and Honduran cigars. Thanks for asking.
Bradley J. asks, Dennis, many Democrats now admit that most Trump voters aren't racist, but if you voted for Trump, you're supporting racism and sexism. How would you respond?
So they say you're supporting racism and sexism even if you are not a racist and sexist. This is the left-wing narrative. It has always been. Coretta Scott King. This was quoted in the New York Times last week. Coretta Scott King, the widow of Dr. Martin Luther King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, said right before the election in 1980 that if you elect Ronald Reagan, you will bring the Ku Klux Klan into the White House. All of my life, that's all the left knows how to do. Can I have a lighter, by the way, guys? This is what I have heard my whole life. You're conservative, right-wing, sexist, and racist, and the xenophobic, the whole thing. They say that this guy Stephen Bannon is an anti-Semite. I wrote a book on anti-Semitism. It's in its third edition, Simon & Schuster. It was first published 30 years ago, and it has always been in print. That's how widely read it is. I taught Jewish history at Brooklyn College. I'm a Jew who has fought anti-Semitism. I know anti-Semitism better than the entire editorial board of the New York Times. And let me tell you something, there isn't a shred of evidence that this guy is an anti-Semite. His editor-at-large at Breitbart is an Orthodox Jew. Do real anti-Semites hire Orthodox Jews? I mean, it is a shame on the left to call this guy anti-Semitic. It's just an example. Those are the terms that they use, and then ask them for proof. They gave us a proof for sexism that he said that there was a headline in Breitbart, women at women don't do as well, or women suck at interviews for tech companies. Why is that sexist? If I say men suck at X, Y, or Z, people will just go, yeah. You can't say a critical word about the female. That makes you a sexist. But you could say anything you want about males, and it doesn't make you a man-hater. You have to understand, again, it's all passion. It's not reason. I want the proof. Donald Trump called one contestant who gained a lot of weight after she was elected Miss Universe, said Miss Piggy. Why does that make him a sexist? Did you hear what he called Ted Cruz? Did you hear what he called Marco Rubio? Did you hear what he called Jeb Bush? How come you could call men names and it doesn't make you a man-hater, but if you call a woman a name, you are a misogynist? Do you understand? It's baseless, and it portrays women as these gentle flowers that just wither at a negative term. We're good?
Mike asks,
yes.
What is your ideal tax plan, Dennis?
My ideal tax plan is a consumption tax. Oh, don't get me started, because it's almost as much fun talking about this as it is smoking a cigar. Almost. I'd rather smoke a cigar than talk about a consumption tax. Nevertheless, very simple. What's a consumption tax? No income tax. You keep the money you earn, all of it. But you pay taxes on what you spend. If we had that in this economy, it would be the most robust economy, not just in American history, in world history. It is the fairest, it is the best, it is the least possible to cheat. The government can't manipulate you anymore. That's why the left hates it, because it takes control of you away. That would be the ideal by far. It's called the fair tax. I don't know why. It's a bad name. It should be called what it is, a consumption tax or a spending tax. Every time you buy something, you pay a certain tax. People say, well, it hurts the poor because they buy bread. There's no tax on bread. Or there will be less tax on the poor who come in to buy basic items like food. That's easily solved.
Tyler A. asks, there seems to be an epidemic of Americans who see themselves as victims. Dennis, how can we fix this?
Tyler A., there is an epidemic of Americans who see themselves as victims. This is so the antithesis of the way Americans regarded themselves in the past. The land of the free and the home of the brave. Brave people don't see themselves as victims. I know people with terrible illnesses who don't regard themselves as victims. And then people who are given health and benefits beyond belief. Black kids at Berkeley walk around thinking they're victims? Of what? You know what they're victims of? Leftism. They really are. That's the irony. They're victims of being told you're a victim. Because I wrote a best-selling book on happiness. It's called Happiness is a Serious Problem. I have a chapter on, half the book is about obstacles to happiness. One of the biggest is thinking that you are a victim. You cannot be a happy, healthy human being if that is your identity.
Taylor N., who's a Prager Force member, he asks, Dennis, how can someone who analyzes the world using their emotions, so progressives, change to analyze the world based on facts and reason?
That's a toughie. How is a Prager Force member asking this? How does somebody who sees the world through emotions come to use reason rather than emotions? One way that I have found, and there's no guarantees, it's very hard to fight the psyche. I can fight the mind, but it's very hard to fight the psyche. And here, the best is to appeal to their emotion. Here's an example. You care about the poor, you care about unemployment. What if I could show you that if you care about unemployment, you should not be for elevating the minimum wage? What if I could prove to you I mean prove, that it increases unemployment among young people who most need to start life with employment. So the question is there even a little tiny opening where reason can touch your emotions? If there isn't, I have to say I'm not sure it's possible.
We have a few more questions. Joseph M. asks, Dennis, how can a millennial like myself best spread conservative and Christian values?
How could a millennial like yourself best spread conservative and Christian values? Number one, the most effective thing in life is to be a good model of what you are. If you strike people as there are two things that are very persuasive in a personal model. If you are a happy person and a good person, you immediately draw people to you and they want to know what's the secret. It's a human response. That is why, for example, religious people of whatever the religion, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, it doesn't matter. Religious people who walk around miserable, they are the greatest advocates, the greatest advertisements for atheism. And that's a very important thing that I tell religious people, because happiness is infectious. It draws people. So the first is the personal model. The second is to be a persuasive, learn the arguments in a persuasive, calm, respectful way, and then use them.
Ross D. asks, Dennis, what books would you recommend I read in order to understand the left's worldview?
You want to understand the left's worldview? Okay. I very rarely mention books I've written, because I'm very self-conscious about sounding like an advertisement. But I will violate that rule here. I believe the best one book, there are superb many books. Liberal Fascism by Jonah Goldberg is a classic, for example. But the best single volume to explain the origins of the left-wing mind and what is flawed about it is my book, Still the Best Hope. Why I forgot the subtitle of my own book, but why the world needs American values to prevail. It's 3 books, that book. It explains Americanism, Islamism, and leftism. It's called Still the Best Hope by Dennis Prager. And I don't care if you get it used, and I don't get a penny royalty, but please read it.
Julie asks, and we have time for 2 more questions. Julie asks, Dennis, what would you say to people who keep saying that America is better off now than we were in 2008?
What do I say to people who say that America is better off now than in 2008? Oh, you mean Obama's? Okay. Ask them, I would like to know in what arena. I would like to know in what arena. Is in foreign affairs? In race relations? Where exactly are we better off? This has been the slowest economic recovery from a recession in American history. And if it weren't for fracking, which the president and the whole left oppose, we would be in a permanent recession. It was bailed out thanks to something Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and the entire Democratic Party oppose. And that is the natural gas produced by fracking. So I would like to know where, and take race. This, in my lifetime, this is the most attention in the racial sphere. And this president has been a large reason. When he says Ferguson, Missouri, when he just says Ferguson as an example of police brutality on a racist basis, he's telling you a lie. Black members of a grand jury found that the police officer was legitimate in his response in that particular instance. It had nothing to do with race. The white officer was right. And in Baltimore, you had black police officers. I would never say there were no racist policemen. But racism, see Larry Elder's video at Prager University, one of the great thinkers of the country who happens to be black. He demolishes the notion that racism is a real problem for blacks in America. How about an 80% out-of-wedlock birth rate? Okay? For any group, that would be utterly destructive. Any group. It has nothing to do with race, but it happens to be the case in the black community. So I would like to know, where are we better off? America is not taken seriously because this president has not stood up for America. He said there was a red line. He said, and he used that word, a red line. If Syria crosses the red line and uses a gas, poison gas, it's a red line. Then they used poison gas, nothing happened. And of course he withdrew the troops from Iraq. We had a relatively, thoroughly peaceful Iraq until President Obama, based on another left-wing promise, let's abandon the people of Iraq. We didn't abandon the people of South Korea. That's why South Korea is flourishing. That's why you have a Samsung phone, but you don't have a North Korean phone, because America did abandon North Korea.
And this will be the final question.
Final question, I'm sorry.
Dana asks, Dennis, what are your thoughts on a two-state solution in the Middle East?
What are my thoughts on a two-state solution in the Middle East? I've always been for a two-state solution. The Palestinians are not for a two-state solution. They were offered their own state under President Clinton. They were offered a 95, 96, or 97, I don't even know because it's debated. Either 95, 96, or 97% of Palestinian land would form a Palestinian state, then Israel would give 3% more or 5% more of their land to make it 100%, and they turned it down, and that's when they unleashed terror bombers to kill kids in pizza places and dance halls. That was the Palestinian response. See my video at Prager University on understanding or explaining the Middle East conflict. And that in 5 minutes you will understand why it has not worked out. But in theory, I'm all for it.
And this isn't much of a question, but Dave's asking, Dennis, do you tweet? Are you on Twitter?
I am on Twitter. I don't tweet nearly as much as many others who tweet, because I have this thing in my brain, if I don't have something truly important to say, don't tweet it. It's probably stupid of me to do that, but that's what I do. However, I would like you to see, can people see all the tweets that I have sent out?
Yeah, so they go to twitter.com.
Okay, twitter.com
at
Dennis Prager, because I have tweeted some important stuff, I think. But 140 characters is a limitation on profundity. And I rather say something profound, and if I can't say it in a tweet, then I just don't tweet. But I do tweet, yes. Thanks a million for being with me, and I would like to make this a regular feature, perhaps every week. You let me know if you think it's a good idea. From my home to your home,